Alright, well yesterday I had got as far as this with my Retina 2. The adhesive will be nice and nicely bonded now for those bellows, so I can open up the front of the camera without fear of the bellows coming adrift. That focus is nice and smooth. I'll see if I can find the components to put the rangefinder coupling arm back on. There's the arm. One. Two small screws. And one for the top of the rangefinder coupling arm. Alright, I'm going to check that that arm goes in the correct place. It is seated in the correct place. Get the first screw started. Get the second screw started, tighten it up, go back and tighten up the first screw. At the top of the camera, our screw has to couple. I'm getting it into that arm. Getting that started, making sure it's all going in smoothly. And you can see as I move the focus settings ring, this arm pulls inwards and outwards, and its task is to move the rangefinder arm. I'll put a bit of grease on that track. As the front of the camera folds up, as you close the front of the camera, you'll see that this arm travels back down this track out of the way, because obviously it's got to go somewhere. But when the camera front is extended fully, the arm is on this part of the track and just pulls backwards and forwards in that line there. I think that's ready to have the front door put back on there now. I'm just checking to see if there's anything else I should have put in first. No, I think that's it. So I'll find my door, find the two paper shim washers. I can see I've got one and the other one is quite badly damaged. Find the screws for it, the two hinge screws. Check to see if it needs a shim washer and then put that back in place. Okay, let's have a look at this door. I'm checking at the two arms here. I've got some slight inward tension on them, but not too much. I'll just brush out any dust that's accumulated in there. Put a little bit of grease on the pivot pins top and bottom, and that's mostly so it'll retain the paper shims, the washers there, the friction washers, which are just made out of cartridge paper. Nothing exciting required there. These ones I have just made and then I've coloured them black with a pen just so that they are not so obvious. I'll run a bit of grease into the slots top and bottom there. This door fits into. I'll hook the bottom piece in place, lift the door up, hook the top piece in place. There's the door sitting in place. We have 2 pivot screws and I'm checking that door to see if there's any up and down rattle. There's a little bit, so I know it'll need a shim washer of some sort in there. I'm seeing if I've got anything that began with it. It doesn't. I've got one there, but it looks too thin to me. I will get a slightly thicker washer, and this is just to take any vertical slop out of that door, because that door is supporting the front standard to some extent, and if it rattles up and down, the point at which the shutter releases will be slightly different depending on how you're holding your mouth, and we'd like things to be a little bit more guaranteed than that. Right, I'll put the shim washer at the bottom. I think there's no significant advantage in putting it at the top. The door looks very central. To run the first hinge screw in, slide in that shim washer. Actually, I think that might be a bit thin for that job. I think I'll look for a thicker one. If it slides in very easily, that's usually a sign that you could do with a thicker one. Of course, that very much depends on whether I have a thicker one available. Here we have one. So I'm lining up the screw hole. Slide that shim washer in, line up the hole, drop the pivot screw in place, and all going well, it'll just do up nicely. The door has no detectable rattle, and the front of the camera opens and closes, and that's quite a positive click as it unlatches. Oh, very much so. Did I replace one of those springs? Perhaps I did. They're not normally as positive as that as to how they pop open. That's alright, we won't complain about that. So the front door. Well, I know that this leather is not only damaged, it's also on here in the wrong direction, wrong orientation, which is why it's buckled up at the corners here. That should have been at the bottom corner somewhere. This is a mess. This is a mess. I'm going to remove the leather off that and see if I can find another one. Well, I've hunted through my box of old pieces of leather and leatherette, and I have this one which looks fairly promising. It seems to wrap around the door correctly, and I think that will glue in place, so that's what I'm going to attempt to do. Alright, I have the front of the camera, the door all cleaned. I've removed the old leather, removed all the traces of old adhesive. I have my piece of used leather here. This is leather, not leatherette, and this will have come off some camera, and typically it must have been an extremely ugly door for me to go to the trouble of stripping the leather off, because if the door was anything other than completely ugly, it's always much easier to change a door than it is to change a leatherette, and I would have kept the entire door to swap onto a camera, not done it this way. But I think that this leather shall do us nicely. And the join is in that bottom corner there, and that should come together and be fairly well disguised. So that's my task, is to get my glue evenly applied to this and then get it fitting to the camera, and hopefully it'll all go smoothly. Wish me luck. Well, I have my leather glued in place. The glue has by no means hardened off yet. That's still quite loose. So comments on this process: if you're trying to get leather back onto an area like this, obviously that's quite heavily tapered. If the leather is sort of bunched up and loose, it needs to be pushed down on the taper to tighten it up. Likewise, if you can't get your seam to close up at the corner, you need to pull it up on the taper to allow it to come forward together. The corners, excuse me, the corners are a bit interesting because you've got a flat into the corner at each edge here too. So it's just a case of getting the leather in place and then checking that it's pushed back firmly, and allow the glue to set up then. And once it's all glued in place, that'll be like $1 million compared to what it was looking like before. So I will leave this to set for 20 minutes, I think, before I continue on with the camera, and then I can start reassembling the film advance. I can also glue the leather back onto the base of the camera and get the tripod surround and the depth of field scale back on there too, I think. I don't think I need the bottom of the camera open in order to put my sprocket shaft back in there. That can easily be fitted in from the top, that's not a problem. So it's well on the way. I'll get this base leather in place, I think. With a big piece of leather like this, you can easily squeeze the leather out, on the adhesive out onto the leather, and then spread it out with a toothpick. If you're dealing with a very small piece of leather or leatherette, it's better to apply a large daub of adhesive to a piece of paper and then transfer it on a toothpick to the leather. You may recall this piece of leather was absolutely loose on the base of the camera when we started. It was just flapping there, and it was only held in place with the two fittings at the end. It was not stuck down at all. It's very, in fact all the leather here is very dusty and rough looking. A bit of polish on that later will make that clean up quite well. So I'll find my components to close up this up, I think, and move on. So what do I need? Here's our depth of field scale. That's those components there. Here is the surround for the tripod socket, and somewhere I should have screws for that. Pull these pieces in where you can see them, I suppose. Screws for the tripod socket surround, that one and that one. Is that camera going to focus? Yes, it looks like it might do it. Right, the tripod surround, made in Germany. Now we want the wording to be the same way up, so it should be that way up. It screws a little bit less pretty. Still, it's more than adequate. That's good. It's getting very dark all of a sudden here. I'll throw a few lights on. It's the depths of winter here, and even though it's only 2:30 in the afternoon, it's getting a bit dim today. It's funny, it was nice and bright and sunny earlier. I was considering going out and doing something exciting like metal detecting. So I'm just using some solvent here to remove old dried grease and dirt. The depth of field scale, of course, is not coupled to anything internally. It's just simply a little calculator disc, and so none of this needs to move with any great rapidity or even ease for that matter. Right, that piece, a little bit of grease on the wavy washer. And a smear around this edge so that it doesn't make any nasty grating sounds when we turn it. That's it. It'd be useful if I could remember to keep you in frame, but that's probably a bit difficult. Here we have it, that moves smoothly, doesn't rattle loose, it's just what we want. So the base of the camera is closed up, our leather's all good on the front of the camera. Check that that leather is indeed stuck down tight, it looks good. That's nice and tidy, and I will just run that cotton bud down that edge there to take off any adhesive that had squeezed out. Make sure that that overlap edge there is overlapped and that the butting edge is butted up The rest of anything left there that looks like a gap will be filled with black wax once it's all hard and dry. So far so good. Now it can have a bit of bench time to dry, I think.